Should you not consent to this recording, please let me know in the chat box in the next couple minutes or so here. So I'll just give you a second. Everyone okay? Okay. I'm going to hit record then. Okay. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm working from Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of the First Nations and Métis people. I would also like to acknowledge that we are all tuning in from various traditional lands and unceded territories of Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and that we remain grateful to the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island who have cared for these lands since time immemorial. As mentioned, today's session will be on trauma and recovery, and our speaker today is the wonderful Autumn Rock. Autumn Rock is a successful business owner, success strategist, and life and recovery coach. As the founder of Rock Life and Success Strategies, Autumn's mission is to empower others. Over 20 years ago, Autumn overcame her own addictions and subsequently battled PTSD from past trauma. Since then, she has been rising above her challenges and mentoring women in business, guiding others in the path to addiction recovery and wellness, and also supporting families. So again, I encourage everyone to hold your questions and maybe write them down and type them in the chat box, as there will be a Q&A that will follow closer to the end of Autumn's presentation. So at that point, I will present them to her. Anyway, on to you, Autumn.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, and welcome everyone. Glad you're here. So today, as we said, we're going to present on recovery and trauma and resilience. And so for me, as Mary said, I grew up, or I struggled with trauma, addiction. I was homeless for a while. I grew up in severe abuse of every kind, and I come from a multi-generational trauma and abuse of females in my family, from my Métis grandmother onward. And so for me, as a trauma survivor, resilience is probably going to be defined differently than, say, just anyone else might define it. So for me, as a survivor, as a sober addict, as someone with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, resilience begins for me with self-regulating, with the ability to self-regulate. So I'm just going to share my screen here, and we'll discuss a little bit about what it means to self-regulate. Just one second. I'm just going to push share screen. This here. These Zoom things are just a bit interesting for that. So for me, when I first came into recovery for addiction, and I spent 16 years trying to get help for the addiction, and I just never felt quite right. I never felt like I was okay. I never felt like I was really coping very well. I was clean and I was sober and I was doing all the things that they were telling me to do, but I didn't feel well. I didn't feel good most of the time. And I didn't understand why. I wasn't diagnosed until my 16th year of recovery with PTSD, which to me was an epic failure on behalf of the many counselors and therapists that I saw throughout the years, trying to get a grip on what was happening for me outside of the addiction. So what we found in my 16th year after a breakdown was that I do have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And what had happened was that through the trauma, a bunch of things had happened, including the dysregulation of my nervous system. So what I ended up doing was fluctuating between 2 out of 3 of these things. So I was either shut down or dissociated or kind of overwhelmed and not in my body or spacing out or whatever. And that began to happen almost automatically, this shutdown business. or I was in fight, flight, or fawn. Now, fawn is where we try and people please other people to be safe in our own space. And we do that kind of frantically, and what can I get you? And how's it, we really try and engage somebody else socially for our own safety, or else we get into fight, or else we just want to run away. And what I found was that I was really residing between shut down and out of control. And that was really not fabulous at all. And what was happening was that I was getting quite unwell over the time. And this is very bad for your overall health and well-being. So upon seeking recovery, upon getting into recovery, I began to learn how to ground. I got some therapy, I got some help, I used guided meditation, and I practiced day in and day out to come back to my own senses, literally come back to my own senses. So I would feel into the things that I felt, physical sensations, I saw, and I heard. And what happened was that the more I practiced to that, I was beginning to run the neural pathways back to the safety and awareness of my present moment. And when I did that, I became more able to think through problems and actually solve those problems. So the first and probably most essential step in my recovery was to learn how to go through this and regulate my nervous system. So that was a big, big part. Now, I just want to check in with you just for a second. Mary, can you see each of those slides? On my screen, the last square is shut down. Can you see all of them? Yeah?
Yes, I can.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. That's great. Okay, so then what happened? So after that, after I got grounded, that wasn't sort of enough. So I could come back to the present moment, but then, life has its problems. It has its triggers. You'll always, you're walking through life, you're going to get triggered. Somebody's going to cut you off in traffic. The kid's going to backtalk. The boss is going to be paying, things are going to happen during our day, and we are going to get triggered. And that's for people with and without PTSD. It just happens, right? So for myself, being able to come back to my conscious mind, to my conscious awareness, was the first step. But secondarily, I needed to do checks within myself. I needed to check internally, my internal checks. And what are my internal checks? I needed to look for, what am I feeling? What am I feeling physiologically? Like what is my physical body telling me? And also, what am I feeling emotionally? Am I sad? Am I angry? Am I happy? What's happening for me on the inside? So internally, what I found was that when I checked in with myself, where I used to really shame myself around anger, say I would get anger, immediately I would feel guilty. Immediately I would feel upset with myself. What's wrong with me? I'm angry. I had learned to do that through the abusive situations. But when I started to heal, I started to really listen to those emotions. And what I found was each emotion had a signal for me. And for me, anger really taught me that I had a boundary, that somebody had stepped on my toes, that they were pushing my boundaries, that something was happening in my world that wasn't right for me. And anger was stepping up to say, hey, something needs to be done here. And so I learned to listen to those internal checks. Now, because I could only do that because I knew how to regulate and stay in control. Before learning how to regulate, anger would hit me and then I would be out of control. And so that's when anger and having emotions felt unsafe. But since I could regulate, then hearing and tapping into those emotions became safe for me. Next, what I could do is I could measure those internal things with what was happening externally. So then I could start doing things like measuring the facts. Okay, what is happening in my world right now? What is actually going on? So did they do or say anything that is out of the bounds of what I value or what I want for myself, or how is this going, right? And, it was very interesting because it was in checking in with those external things that I understood that wow, you know, some of my perceptions are really, some of the places that there should be boundaries, some of the places where I should be registering in the moment that this is unsafe or unhealthy or just not good for my self-esteem or whatever, that those checks and balances that my friends who didn't go through the same kind of trauma I did had, I didn't have them. I didn't have them. And one of the most, you know, one of the most recent things that happened was I had been in a relationship with someone who would get really, really upset when challenged. And they would drive the car really, really fast, like 160 kilometers an hour in, you know, not a great headspace. Now, to people who don't have this sort of, you know, shut off valve that I have, that would immediately say, I am unsafe, let me out of this truck, I'm not okay, this sort of thing. But for me, I didn't even register that I was unsafe in that moment at all. I was too busy doing, you know, fight, flight, freeze stuff, or, you know. So what ended up happening next was I could check in with those external things, really check those facts, really look at what happened. And then what I needed to do was I needed to form healthy connections and supports. So I'm very blessed in that I have really great women in my life now. I have people in my life who I can go to and say, hey, you know what? These things here, they happened. And I'm not feeling okay about it. And so can you give me your feedback about this? What do you see? And so in those connections and those supports, I could start to mend the holes in my boundary fence, if that makes any sense. So they could say, hey, you know, have you considered that driving that fast put you in danger? And I could go, wow, you know, yeah, shoot, that did happen. And yeah, that's not okay. And it's not okay if they threaten me in that way. And it's not okay for this. And it's not okay for that. And you know what? Prior to that, I didn't see it. I had learned in childhood not to see it, because in childhood, it was too scary to see. And in the abusive relationships I had been in, it was too scary to see. So really forming healthy connections and supports with people who had my well-being at the top of their list really made a huge difference. And the wonderful thing was that in those healthy connections and supports, we could do that for each other, because somehow I could see for other people what I couldn't necessarily see for myself. And so when we team up to strengthen each other, we really do empower one another in so many different ways. So another place I needed to learn to recover was my understanding of the difference between love and empathy. And now, why is that important? You know, empathy is a wonderful thing and love is a wonderful thing. Well, I can tell you why it's important for my life and for what I have experienced. So love, you know, can be described in a lot of different ways. And, you know, I did some research and I looked online and I thought, well, what are they describing love as, you know? And so what I looked for and what I found was that love was mutual. So it goes like both ways. And that was probably my first thing. So I thought, like, so long as I love somebody, then it's okay if that's not coming back at me, or if ill treatment, right? I didn't realize that that wasn't the thing. Also, consistent, affectionate, generous, caring for another person's well-being, kind, tender, passionate, conscious, secure, and having a balance of power. Now, when I had, like, the love relationships I had experienced in the past, really, you know, we called it love, but it wasn't a whole lot of those things. What I found instead was what my mother had experienced and what her mother had experienced, which was that often, you know, our behavior was quite loving. often we were putting all these things out, but what was happening was sort of this inconsistent love coming back. So we were going through what might be called what I think is called the cycle of abuse. So what was happening instead was that we would get love for a while, or what looked like love bombing, they call this. So you're everything to them. You're this beautiful, wonderful, you're such a wonderful woman and all these things. And it felt so very, very good in those moments of love bombing, And then what would happen is there would be a bit of a rest space. And then there would be tension building. And then some sort of abuse, whether that was verbal, physical, all the different kinds of abuse would come out, right? And then we would do that whole cycle over and over again. And somewhere in that cycle, I would have my empathy played on. Now, my empathy is my ability to feel what somebody else feels and really want to help that other person. And when I mistake empathy for love, I can get dragged back into that cycle really, really, really easily. Because all of a sudden I'm saying, okay, I can really empathize with why this person is hurting. And I can really feel what they feel. And I feel so very sorry for them. And I really want to help them. And so then I get pulled in and pulled in and pulled in again to a relationship that isn't much of those actual love tendencies and those things that are going to build me up and make me more of who I am in the world rather than less of who I am in the world. So I hope that makes some sort of sense too. The other thing is that is this thing between earned and assumed trust. Now there's a lot, like I went on the internet, I did some research, I researched these topics. I've researched them a lot before I was preparing for this, and then I re-researched them just to make sure that we were good for this presentation. And so, earned trust and assumed trust are two very different things. Now, when you go online, there's a lot of columnists out there who are saying, like, why trust isn't an earned thing, Brene Brown says, oh no, you need to put like marbles in the trust marble jar. And once you've got enough marbles in the trust marble jar, then I can trust you, right? And I tend to agree with her on that. So earned trust rather than assumed trust means that I can see over time that someone is behaving consistently in a trustworthy way, in a way that is honest, is integral, that they are good for and enhancing my overall well-being, that I can say things to them and it's not going to come back to me in ways that are harmful to my reputation or whatever. And so, we can't spend too much time on this topic, but if you would like to sort of look more into it, Brene Brown has a great acronym. She calls it BRAVING. And so if you just Google Brene Brown, BRAVING, that's a wonderful, wonderful resource on the difference between earned trust and assumed trust. And she gives you all the different features of what it means to be in a trustworthy relationship. So now I just want to balance that with assumed trust. Now, I've met a lot of people in my life, and I've been actually a magnet for people who can be quite abusive because I grew up in that sort of way. I had both the unconscious and conscious patterning for abusive relationships, and they really needed to be overridden. Those unconscious pathways needed a conscious override. So what does assumed trust mean? Well, assumed trust means that I'm being asked to trust you right away. So Mary would come to me and say, hey, Autumn, we're going to do this thing and blah, blah, blah. And I want you to be in a relationship with me and you need to trust me right now. Well, Mary and I just met. So as much as I she looks trustworthy, she seems wonderful, You know, everything about her seems to be really, really kind. You know, it would be in both of our best interest to get to know one another and form earned trust and a solid base for a relationship, rather than just assuming that it's all going to be good and then, you know, risking a whole lot of things that might not work out in the end. And so knowing that I have the right to do that is a really big piece of my puzzle, because I have people, or I've had people in my past who would shame me or really come after me for saying, you know, I'd just like to get to know you. Well, what? Don't you trust me? Well, it's not that I don't trust you, and it's not that I do trust you. It's that I don't know you, and I'd really like to know you, and I'd really like to form trust over time. And I think that that's a place I needed to get to, rather than just going, no, no, I'm not saying I don't trust you. Of course I trust you, you know, but how can you trust someone if you don't know them, right? So it makes sense to me, and I'm happy to answer questions about that after. The next thing I really needed to do after I started allowing myself more safety with the people around me was that I really needed to start allowing myself more safety with me. So now I'm grounded, and I've started to listen to myself and do some internal checking and some external checking. And I've begun to really have more trustworthy and healthy connections in my life. What I needed to do then was really change some of the things that had been handed to me over the years. When I was younger, I was so distracted by the abuse in my life that I would go to school, and because I was going to school under duress and in the midst of developmental trauma, I couldn't think in school. And I couldn't sit very well in class and concentrate. And so my grades were very, very low. And so the word stupid flew around a lot in my direction. And by the time I had come to recovery at, you know, in my early 20s, I truly believed that I was stupid. And it was only through, it was an interesting thing, because my husband at the time, who could be quite abusive, went to university. And it was a wonderful gift to me that he went to university, because he went to university and he passed at university. And when he signed up for university, I thought, well, he's in my class of people, so he's not going to be able to do university. There's no way that guy's going to pass, because he's in my class of people and we're stupid. And he went to university and the guy passed. And it was kind of funny, because like I thought, you know, I'm not all that bright, but I'm brighter than that guy. Like I'm smarter than that guy. I know that for sure, you know? And so the next year I went to university, and not only did I pass, I got honors grades, you know? And so these narratives, you know, we pick them up along the way, but they're not necessarily true. And so as I came into, you know, and that was before I got into the PTSD stuff. And so when I was in the recovery from the trauma, I was working with a therapist. And at one point in time, I was feeling grounded enough. I was feeling in my body enough. I was supported enough to face some of the damaging effects that had been done. And I can remember doing this meditation whereby I held in my hands the shame of the sexual abuse, the shame of the name calling, all the shame of those things that had happened to me. And I put them in my hands and I walked them over to the abuser. And I said, here, these are yours. And I gave them back. And, you know, after that, there was quite a bit more freedom, because that was not my story. That was not who I am. That was what those people decided to do with their pain. And I had decided to do something very, very different with mine. And so I needed to understand truly and clearly what my narrative is. And so, so changing that narrative is really, really important, you know? So next we have empowerment, which, you know, this is the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. So without a slide for empowerment, I thought, you know, this is probably not exactly what we're looking for. But so what happened was, like, upon successfully being able to stay within my ability to cope, honoring and healing my internal and external perceptions, forming more healthy and supportive relationships, giving myself time to discover, you know, my own narrative with compassion and love, and connecting with other people who actually were being loving and supportive in my life, I finally had the ability to discover my own values, my own skills. I was able to strengthen those values, those skills. I was able to let go of a lot of that shame, right? I can remember sitting there and going, you know, really, I had 2 daughters, and I looked at them, and, you know, I thought about, they had become the same age that I was when one of my abusers was being quite cruel to me. And I had this visual of them. And I thought about my own self and my ability to, like, and would I ever hurt my child in that way? And it was in that moment that it became, again, one of those things that there was no possible way that at that age I could have been deserving of any of that. Somehow I had convinced myself, both in childhood and in my abusive marriage, that there was something wrong with me, intrinsically wrong with me, that had these other people doing these behaviors to me. But that was not the truth. And that was never my fault. And those were not my actions, right? Now, I had made some mistakes, no doubt. You don't raise children fluctuating from fight or flight or shut down and not make mistakes with your children, right? Raising your children. And I did raise 2 beautiful daughters on my own. And I did have to make amends for some of the mistakes I had made as a parent and just in life, right? There's not a perfect mother, there's not a perfect person in this world. But what I can say is that though I haven't been perfect, I have done a lot of things right. And I think what we can do is we can say that, you know, because I haven't done this and this and this right, well, it's just not good enough. But we really disempower ourselves then. We must look at, yes, I make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes, and speak to ourselves with compassion about those mistakes. And then go, okay, you know, I don't have responsibility over these other people's behaviors. And I do have responsibility to make right my mistakes when I make them, so I can do that. I have the power to do that. And then when I let go of all of this, and I start to own this, and I start to be able to sync my energy rather than trying to change the things that I cannot change, I can really begin to develop and change the things that I can, which is pretty cool, you know? And so I'm a woman whose Métis grandmother died in her 40s from alcohol-related liver cancer. I'm a woman who watched her own mother, be terribly abused. I was terribly abused myself. And in my teen years, I was homeless and I was drug addicted. After that, I escaped an abusive marriage and raised 2 daughters as a single mom. And I was called crazy and rejected when I broke down and spent time in the psych ward for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And as it turns out, even with all of that, When I let other people own their own shame, and I did my best anyways, I discovered that I can do a lot. I can run my own businesses and companies. I've employed dozens of people over the years. I've started not only my own businesses, but I've helped 10 other women to start their own businesses too. Aside from my day job, where I work with marginalized individuals at the local Transition Society, I'm also Speak My Truth online. I was asked to begin sharing that truth from the stage. Then I was asked to be the co-founder and co-producer of the Women Who Inspire conference here on the West Coast. I'm the CEO of Rock Life Recovery and Success Strategies. I'm the current president for the Pride Society in my community. And I'm honored to say that I will be serving as an advisor for the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. And though I once believed that the world would be a better place without me, I'm now so excited to see what tomorrow will bring. And my daughters, though I'd always I think there's a mother guilt, I think that sometimes we have this time where we're like, I really had a lot of shame about, oh, that's funny. That's, speaking of my daughters, one of them just called me now, but I had a lot of shame, about not being able to give them more, and this last year, my daughter wrote me this note, and I think it's just a really good contrast to the idea that we can have these struggles and we can have these imperfections and we can go through these really hard things, and we can make mistakes with our children, and we can still have the power to do really great things. And so this is a note that I received from my 19-year-old daughter this last year. She said, "Thank you for all that you have done for me, and all that you continue to do for me, and all that you do for yourself, and all that you do for others. You are the bestest, strongest woman I have ever met, and the greatest mother I am blessed to have. You are the strength, poise, love, caring, and badassery I aspire to be. And I know for a fact that it may feel like people around you aren't as appreciative as you would like them to be sometimes. But I can speak for myself and say that you are more appreciated in my life than any other person. I've learned so much from you and continue to learn from you day in and day out." And a few years ago, I was sitting in this situation, and I spoke about it at the first Women Who Inspire conference when I said, "You are always inspiring something." And that mentor said to me, "What are you doing with your life today?" And she really reminded me that there was not a whole lot I could do about what other people were doing with their life today. And the more I decided I needed to control what other people were doing with their lives, the more I was robbing myself of the opportunity to do something with mine. And so what I do every day is I get up in the morning and I think, well, what am I going to do with my life today? And then I just put in my best effort. And I try not to exhaust myself, but I I try to make room for joy and rest also. But I do my very best each and every day. And those results can come from those things. And I'm not alone in that. I'm not alone in what, in leadership with women. I'm not alone in that. And though we as women, we hold a very small percentage of the leadership positions in the world, there's been some stats put out recently about women's abilities. And so according to an analysis of thousands of 360-degree reviews, women are rated better than men on key leadership capabilities. They outscored men on 17 of the 19 capabilities that differentiate excellent leaders from average or poor ones, according to Zenger and Folkman 2019. Women were rated as excelling in taking initiative, acting with resilience, practicing self-development, driving for results, and displaying high integrity and honesty. Women do not necessarily rate themselves as generously as men. And what women hold back is not a lack of capability, but the dearth of opportunity and an unconscious bias. So during COVID-19, Women-Led Nations, Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, early lockdown, 20 deaths in comparison in a country of 5 million people. Angela Merkel was in Germany. She has extensive testing and plenty of ICU beds and periodic reminders to take the virus seriously, and also reduced her numbers. And there's just a ton of different women-led nations. Taiwan used contact tracing and isolation measures to control infections without a full national lockdown, amongst the world's best responses. And it just continues and continues, right? When we look at what we're actually capable of doing in comparison to the biases we face and the lack of ability in the world. So what do we need to do about that? I think we need to actively engage in believing that we are leaders. We need to engage in believing in our own potential. We need to treat female leadership as a tangible skill. And we need to continue to establish those healthy connections, supports, relationships, and networks in places just like this. Because whether we're talking about recovering personally, or whether we're talking about recovering nationally or globally, we cannot do it without one another. So we need to stand beside one another, and we need to educate one another and lift one another up. Which is why when I put out my last talk only to 2 people, I put it out for training purposes to a local recovery treatment center and to one Facebook group, which is where Messi found me and then asked me to come and do this. And I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy to be here free of any charge and to be of assistance in any possible way that I can, because I really do believe in us. And I've seen not only myself, but many, many other women recover and gain resilience over the years. And so with that, I just want to say we are stronger together. And thank you for letting me speak.
Wow, amazing. Even on the sidebar here, there's a couple people, one person said, "You are a really brave woman, and it goes to show how we can change our lives with support and hard work and recovery." And another person in all caps said, "Women are phenomenal." But that was amazing. I really appreciate you speaking to being conscious of our nervous systems when we're dysregulated, and that kind of leads into a couple of questions that came through that I'll pull up right now. Somebody asked, so yeah, we're going to move into the question period now. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box, or you could put them in the chat box on the side there. So another person just wrote, "You are amazing." But anyway, back to dysregulation and your nervous system. Somebody asked, how do you go about regulating and grounding yourself? And then went on to say, or ask if that's mindfulness.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of words that are out there, right? We can have mindfulness meditation. We can call that grounding. We can call that all sorts of things, you know? For me, what I can say is that there's been a lot of different practices that I use. One of them, because some of my trauma was in childhood, and because that can create a bit of a regression, right? I have these big woman hands now, or maybe they're man hands, I don't know what they are, but I have these things, you know, and I look at them and I remember that I'm an adult, and they remind me that I'm an adult. And so when I'm feeling really small, and it's so easy to get feeling really small, I can remind myself by just looking at my hands that I'm a woman now and I have strength, you know? So that's one of the things that I do. Another thing that I do is something called the 5 to 1, and I was taught that through mental health. And what that is you look around the room and you think of 5 things that you can see. So right now I see a light, I see a plant, I see a window, I see a lamp, I see a picture, and I see my hand dodging around the room. And then the other thing you would do is you would say 5 things I hear. So that's always harder. Like what do I hear? I hear maybe a truck going by. I hear my own voice. I hear the heater. I hear my breath. And I hear the ticking of a clock. And then the next thing I would do is things that I feel. So physical sensations. So I can feel my hair on my head. I can feel my bum in this chair. I can feel the heat of the tea in my hand. I can feel that my legs are crossed and that my toes are actually touching. And so, things that I feel. And then the reason they call that the 5 to 1 is because then you go 4 things that you see, hear, and feel. And then 3, and then 2, and then 1. And I find that when I do that, I'm back in the room again. And I'm in touch with my senses. And so then there's one more that really works for me, and that's called progressive relaxation. And progressive relaxation, you could probably Google it. It's something that I use where I actually will breathe in and breathe out, and within each breath in. Oh, and I think that I have that one on YouTube, actually. There's a guided meditation on YouTube. If you Google Rock Life Recovery and Success Strategies and Autumn Rock, there's a free YouTube video for that one. And essentially what you do is you just breathe in and you relax every muscle from your forehead to your toes, starting with each muscle group. You just breathe in and breathe out, and it just helps to relax and come back to the present moment. So those are the things that work the best for me.
Yeah, those are great, really wonderful. And if anybody didn't catch that, you can go to Autumn's YouTube, Rock Life Recovery, and find, I'm sorry, was it called progressive relaxation or?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and find that there.
I think it's called Relax on YouTube. It's just
Relax?
called, yeah.
Okay.
On my YouTube page, yeah.
Somebody asked, can you send us that reference of women as better leaders?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll make it.
Yes, I can. So would I send that to you, Mary, or how would I do that?
Yeah, you could send it to me, and then we could send it out to participants today.
Sure thing.
And then we will also share the presentation at the end. So somebody else said, you're amazing. Thank you for your inspiring message.
Thank you.
And another question here. She was just asking, or she was just mentioning how she was helping with some women who are experiencing crisis at work, and that this person is a social worker, and she expressed feeling resiliency fatigue. And anyway, she was also asking and requesting if she can get a copy of this presentation. And again, yeah, we'll be sending a copy out.
Sure. And just with that, I think, one thing that maybe didn't get mentioned in the first little bit of the presentation is actually is how much taking rest is so very important, right? Having like sleep, good self-care, it's imperative to being able to relax that nervous system. So really resting. I think so many of us have a lot to do in our lives, and especially myself, because I have a great compassion and empathy for what's happening in the world. I can push myself too hard and forget to self-care. And so I think that self-care is another very important portion. We can get other care so much that we forget. Yeah.
I have another question. this person thanked you for explaining that, and I'm thinking she might be referencing the grounding strategies.
Okay. Yeah.
And then she's gone on to ask, how do you go about finding the right therapist, especially given the shortage and limited access?
Yeah. See, that's a really big issue,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that it's a part of why I went 16 years undiagnosed. And it's one of the things that we need to, those of us who can, need to really be lobbying for better mental health care, because we have health care here in Canada, but the mental health care is really limited.
Mm-hmm.
And so, more public access to mental health care would be wonderful. More supports in the way that we work with one another. Yeah, and I can honestly say that um, my story, like you have to be very careful about therapists. Like the wrong therapist can almost do more damage than not seeing a therapist at all. Like I had a few actually that were far more damaging to my mental health than yeah, one actually suggested that I needed sex therapy, and if I just did these sexual things with him, I might get better from the sexual abuse. And I was just lucky enough to have resources at the time that I could go to and say, here's, this isn't feeling right. What do you think?
Right, right.
And those healthy connections and support said, oh my God, don't do that. And that guy needs to be fired. Um, but yeah, I think that too, like honoring your own self and your own ability, like yourself better than anyone. Really.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
Yep.
if you're being pushed too far,
Yeah.
and this isn't, and honoring that, going, saying to myself, this doesn't feel right, or I'm tired today. I don't think I have the capability to do this,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
or something you've tried and you're feeling worse over time, then that's not strengthening. And I think for myself, my big thing, and again, saying this out loud might bring some controversy with those people who believe in reliving trauma in order to work through trauma. What I can really say is that for me, reliving trauma has never ever done anything good for me.
Mm-hmm.
Going back into the trauma, reliving that sort of thing. My last therapist that I spoke to said, you never have to talk about that again if you don't want to. And I was shocked. I had been in 16 years of talk therapy where all they wanted to do was go over it and over it and over it, and nothing was budging, right? And so she said, no, what we're going to do is we're going to try and convince your nervous system that that's over now. So you can live your life now free of that.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to work with your body in ways that are going to free that system up from the trauma,
Mm-hmm.
rather than keep it reliving and responding to that trauma. So for me, and again, I can only speak for myself, and I'm not a therapist, I'm a coach. And there's a very distinct difference between that. So I can help support, and I can move, and I can make suggestions, and I can help people find their own truth. But I don't do therapy myself, and that's important. Yeah, but I do have some contacts and connections with somatic therapists too, who help relieve to relieve the trauma from our physicality, from where our bodies remember where it
And
is.
that might actually tie into this other question where a person asks, is there a list of references you can share to help get moving forward faster? And I'm thinking this might be linked to how do you go about finding the right therapist, etc. So,
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
yeah. I think again, I'm not sure about what the exact question is. So the question is again.
So it's the same person who asked, how do you go about finding the right therapist, especially given the shortage and limited access?
Yeah.
And And then to follow that, they said, is there a list of references you can share to help get moving forward faster? So maybe what I could do is ask this person to elaborate on that question. So
Sure. Yeah, I think the only part I don't understand there is like, sure, we could get we could talk about some recovery coaches that can help the process along, and then we can talk about some therapists who might be, we could refer them to after the session. I know that the Canadian Center for Women's Empowerment also has mentors. Is that true? Yes.
and I will bring that up. So once we finish these questions, I'll certainly bring up the services offered at the Canadian Center for Women's Empowerment, and then of course how to reach us. So
Yes.
everyone just hang in, and we'll get through the rest of these questions, and then I could let you know where to go next.
Absolutely. And my logo is here. If you want to look, you can always go to my website. You can always you can email me also. The email's there. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and we will together as a team try to find you the right resources. So whether it's from within the Canadian Center for Women's Empowerment, or whether we can reach someone else, then we'll do what we can to certainly connect you.
Absolutely. And so another question, someone asked, when dealing with shame, did you read some material also? And did you use those reading materials in your therapy sessions?
Oh.
Interesting question.
I'm a reader. Most definitely I'm a reader. So, and I'm a very proactive person. And I have been doing, I've been doing different therapies from the age of when I first went into foster care at 14. I had a social worker that I worked with, and then I was on the streets, and then I got into recovery, and then I had, I went through reparenting stuff, and all sorts of things. I researched everything from how they deal with PTSD in the military to Brene Brown's work, to just a ton of different types of therapy. Brene Brown does have a lot of really great resources around shame as well. I'm a big fan of her work, and for myself, I think that she, one of the things that she says, and that it's been described even before I discovered Brene Brown, that guilt is the feeling of I've done something wrong. And shame is the feeling that I am something wrong. That as a person, I am wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so shaking that, I think we all innately know that shaking that is a very important piece of recovery, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to walk around feeling like that there's something innately wrong with them. And so, yeah, shaking that was a big deal. And what I can say too was that one day it just occurred to me that if I wouldn't listen to me, if I wouldn't speak to myself with kindness, how could I ask other people to do so?
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, I started to listen to that narrative, like we spoke about that internal narrative, and I started to listen to the way I spoke to myself every single day, the stories I was telling myself every single day. And I was literally, I could hear the voices of my abusers replaying in my head every day. And what would happen is I'd be like cooking supper or something, and something would drop on the floor, and my brain would say, "Oh, you klutz," or my brain would, "Geez, you're stupid," or, all these sorts of things. And it was like living with my abuser 24/7, except for now my abuser was me.
Yeah, very good observation.
Right? Mm-hmm. The abuser was me. It was replaying over and over and over again in my own head. And I had to make a conscious decision to stop it.
Yeah.
and to argue back. And so the next time that the thing hit the floor that I was cooking, you know, the pepper hit the floor, I went, my brain went, you klutz. I went, oh, I'm not. Everybody drops things once in a while. And then it went from that to, it's okay, you got this, and then pick up the thing, right? And I thought, well, how would I want my daughter spoken to? And that's how I started to speak to myself. And it really is about changing that internal messaging. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
And it kind of, on to the next person, they had a statement, or I guess it would, yeah, it's a question. So we have only about 4 minutes left.
Sure.
So I'm going to kind of get to these last couple of questions here so I can wrap things up for everyone.
Sure.
Super exciting conversation, though. We could probably sit here for a long period of time, I bet.
Yeah.
Here. So, yeah, someone had just a statement, and then there's a question that follows. So one person said, I agree that the wrong therapist can do a lot of damage. Yes. And trauma therapy is probably something we all need because most of us have experienced some type of abuse in childhood or as adults. And then somebody said, where do we hold trauma in our bodies? What type of trauma goes where in the body? For example, head, back, shoulders. Again, we have about 3 minutes left, but we could add another 5 minutes, actually, I just noticed, if people want to hang in there. So yeah, back to that. I'm not sure if you want to speak to where people hold trauma in their bodies and where it goes, like in the back, shoulders, or what have you.
Well, I think, so what I've learned is that really, like Dr. Peter Levine, you could write that to him, Dr. Peter Levine, is a really, really great resource about how the body remembers. Each body remembers differently. So I can't really tell you where you're going to hold your trauma, and you couldn't tell me where I'm going to hold mine. But what I know is that, like, for instance, one time, a teacher, and they could get away with this back in my time. I was born in 1975, and somehow, you know, in that age, you know, a teacher could get away with whacking a kid over the back with a meter stick.
Yeah.
And my teacher did that. And, you know, and my body didn't release that until 40 years later with good therapy. And every time I screwed up, I would feel that there, along with an intense rush of heat and embarrassment, because she hit me in front of the whole class. So every time I felt like I had made a mistake, that memory would come up in my body.
Yes.
So, you know, sometimes it's just in recognizing, oh my gosh, that's what this is, you know, that I can release it now. But you know, it's a really good idea, you know, to have a real, you know, to have those supports and to not try and do that on your own. You know, it's very important to get the right support.
Absolutely. And another participant said, how about John Bradshaw on shame?
On shame. I think it's a good resource too. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that you know that different doctors and different practitioners speak to different people.
Yeah.
So I think we all have our own way, and we all know what works for us. And when we start to honor that, then we can really honor, you know, a narrative beyond the shame too. So, you know, honoring that we all have different pathways for healing.
Absolutely.
Is really important part of discovering our pathways for freedom. Yeah.
And somebody mentioned that Tara Brach, I believe that's how you say her last name, or Brach, is a great resource as well.
Great.
So people could write that one down. But that seems to be where the questions have simmered.
Fabulous. So, right on time.
Yeah, so it is 3 o'clock. Yeah. So I just want to, I don't know actually if you have any final words, Autumn, before I close this out.
Well, I think really that my hope is sincerely that each and every person here would choose to really empower one another.
Mm-hmm.
And we may not be able to find our perfect therapist right off the hop. We may not be able to do, you know, all everything all at once, you know, but we can encourage one another in grounding. We can encourage one another in trustworthy behaviors. We can encourage one another in connecting with other people who are good for us. We can really help to strengthen one another. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I know to be true is that women have been taught to compete with one another for
Right.
generation and generation and generation of being sort of enslaved to a male population that they were considered own, you know, they were considered objects to be owned, and that came along with the property. And so in that historical, you know, teaching, in that historical memory that we hold, we can really start to compete with one another and be afraid of one another rather than really lift one another up. And I just want to encourage us to have words of kindness, to have
Mm-hmm.
words of encouragement. It's not that we're not going to have problems or conflicts, but we can meet those conflicts with kindness and in a way that builds one another up instead of tearing one another down. And I think that's the most important part, if I could say anything, that we
Mm-hmm.
can really together strive for a better world for women, and
Mm-hmm.
that we are stronger together. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Autumn, for your knowledge and time. A few people already have said this has been a great webinar. On behalf of Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, I would also like to take the time to thank our collaborators. So that's Fabiola's Addiction, Mental Health Awareness and Support Foundation, also Fédération Femmes et Fonds Événements, sorry for my terrible French accent, uh, SMJ Magazine, and Shellen House of Films. Also want to give many thanks to our volunteers who helped make this possible. And I would like to thank all participants for tuning in today. Should you need additional support or have any further questions, please email Canadian Centre of Women's Empowerment at info@ccfwe.org. I also invite you to contact Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment should you be interested in their mentorship program or their resource program as well. To learn more about those services, please visit the website. It's a great website at ccfwe.org. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, and take care until next time. So I'm just going to, I'm not sure if there's still a couple of participants in here right now. I'm just looking to save the video at this point, and I have to exit the meeting for it to save. So, oh, somebody just joined the webinar. Oh, I'm sorry, person who just joined. It actually just wrapped up, but if you email us at info, let me just double check. I don't want to give you the wrong information here. Email us at info@ccfwe.org and we can help you out with getting the information that was covered in this webinar, okay? Sorry about that. Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to close out of the meeting now, and Messi had talked about possibly debriefing, and I don't know if she wanted to set up another Zoom outside of this one, just so I can close this off and make sure I save the video.
Sure.
So,
I'll leave it also and try and save it from my end as well. And
okay.
then I just want to read these two last messages if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Just the person who just joined in. Okay, good. I'll leave too, and then you can,
Okay.
if you'd like to send me another invite, then I'll wait around for that. Okay.
Okay.